Good morning, friends, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, gathered wherever we may be, as together we commemorate this day of Good Friday. I want to share with you this morning some words from John's Gospel, chapter 19, reading from verse 16 to 18. There, John writes that they handed Jesus over to them to be crucified. So they took Jesus, and carrying the cross by himself, he went out to what is called the place of the skull, which in Hebrew is called Golgotha. And there they crucified him, and with him two others, one on either side, with Jesus between them. About 3 weeks ago, around March 23rd, it was reported that a 72-year-old Italian priest, Father Giuseppe Berardelli, who had earlier been diagnosed with the coronavirus, he gave up a ventilator which his own parishioners had purchased for him. And he did so in order to save the life of someone younger than himself, someone whom he did not know, someone who was also battling with the very same virus that he was battling with. And of course, Father Berardelli, he also later died. It was a story that was reported widely by the news media, I believe because it resonated so very deeply with so many as just a shining example of the generous and courageous love of one human being for another. Unconditional love, no strings attached. I suspect that Father Berardelli's decision to give up his ventilator was a decision that was not so much made in that moment. In fact, I suspect that it was a culmination of a lifetime of selfless decisions and selfless acts towards others, of course, which many of his close associates would later attest to. He made the decision to walk down a path which he knew, in a sense, would lead to his own death. But yet, he continued along that path, and he did so courageously, primarily out of love for God, but also out of love for this person whom he did not know. And so he died so that another might live. Jesus said, "No one has greater love than this, than to lay down his life for his friend." And so Good Friday, friends, reminds us that this is the love with which God has first loved us. And he considers us to be his friends if we do as he commands. In journeying and setting his face toward Jerusalem and entering that city as we commemorated on Palm Sunday, Jesus' entire life was a fulfillment of the many prophecies which Israel had come to know and come to learn about the coming Messiah. This was the promised one, like the great prophet Moses, who would arise from the line of King David, who would lead the people of God out of bondage into a new exodus. This is the anointed one proclaimed by the prophet Isaiah, on whom the Spirit of the living God rested, this anointed one who would bring good news to the oppressed, who would bind up the brokenhearted, who would proclaim liberty to the captives and release to the prisoners. But yet this was also the suffering servant proclaimed by that very same prophet, the one who would be betrayed into the hands of sinners, the one who would be mocked, the one who would be despised, who would be rejected, this one who would be bruised and spit upon, this one who would bear all our infirmities, but yet remain silent like that lamb which is led to the slaughter. In other words, Jesus' decision to enter Jerusalem on that fateful day was not a decision that he made in that moment in which he entered, but rather it was a culmination of a lifetime of obedience to the will of the Father. This was the culmination of a decision to remain faithful to this God for the salvation of God's people, and in fulfillment of the scriptures. And so Jesus knew that continuing down this path would lead to his own death. But yet he continued along that path courageously. And he faced and he confronted the gruesome reality of his own death. He moved from what he knew the Messiah must endure to the reality of that thing now right in front of him as he faced those who accused him. And friends, lest we assume otherwise, his agonizing prayers in the Garden of Gethsemane remind us that his confronting his death in this way was by no means easy, that it was not in any way made easier because he was the Son of God. We're reminded that he prayed, "My Father, if this cannot pass, unless I drink it, your will be done. Yet not my will, but your will be done." And so Jesus endured great suffering. He endured great agony, friends. He laid down his life and died in order that you and I might live. And because he is God's own Son, because he is God's own promised Messiah, his life makes possible salvation not just for one, it doesn't just save one, but this is salvation that is made possible for the whole world. John 3:16 reminds us, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, so that everyone who believes in him may not perish but may have everlasting life." God did not send the Son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him. And so Jesus faced God's wrath against all sin, against all evil, in order that we might not. He walked into the darkness. He walked into the darkness of that moment. He walked into the darkness of this world so that that very same darkness might never overcome us. And so, friends, we serve the living God who goes before us into the worst of this world's darkness. He goes into things that we will never have to encounter in this world. We serve a God who goes with us, a God who promises never to leave us, a God who promises never to forsake us, but promises to be with us even to the end of the age. And so we need not have fear of death just sort of hovering over our lives, dictating all of our decisions like an ominous sense. We need not fear these things. But rather, the writer of the letter to the Hebrews says, "We do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who in every way has been tested as we are, yet without sin. Although he was a son," the writer says, "he learned obedience through what he suffered. And having been made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey him." Friends, we serve the living God who invites us not only to consider what Jesus would do in any particular moment in time, but we serve the God who invites us into a life of a relationship of humble and obedient service to him our whole lives long, not just in the moment. For friends, to be that kind of person is to be like him. To be that kind of person is to be someone who is trained in the same kind of disposition like this Father Berardelli. It is to be one who has been liberated in this life from the fear of death, in order that we might be freed for the service of the living God, for the service of those whom God places right around us. Jesus said, "Those who want to save their life will lose it. But those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will indeed find it." You know, we cannot know in advance the times of testing to which we will be called in this life. But we know the God who has gone before us. We know the God who journeys with us. We know the God who invites us to journey with him. And we know that this God will also be right there with us whenever those times of testing should come. And so my prayer for us on this Good Friday is that we may receive the grace, that we may receive the courage to love and serve and remain faithful to him, to remain obedient to him, wherever he may lead us in this life, to the times of testings which may come our way. And so we say on this day, thanks be to God. Amen.